Yeah, so thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar today. This webinar will be on key pricing methods, including elasticities, cost and value pricing, and other methods, how these are used in practice, what the advantages and disadvantages are, and how technology can help you better navigate these methods. You want to go to the next slide? I can quickly introduce us. So Ingo, our founder, with 12 years experience in pricing, is the developer of the Buynomics method, who really looked at what's out there in the market, what's being used, and I think the software was really founded on some of the insights that we'll share today. So I think quite fascinating to have Ingo's view here today. And I'm Paul. Used to work in consulting, and I'm going to give a quick intro on the topic today and on our company. And I'm also the first point of contact if you want to learn more about our solution. Ingo, if you want to go to the next page, we prepared just a quick overview, 3 quick bullet points on what we do. So our method is basically a machine learning algorithm which is able to forecast consumer purchasing decisions. And this allows you to really optimize your products, your pricing, your portfolio promotions, or trade terms. And we generate on average 3 to 7% return on sales here, that being in very mature industries such as consumer goods or telco. In other industries, we have achieved even higher profit returns. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Ingo, if you want to go to the next slide. I think it's quite interesting also to introduce where we are in the pricing framework, and if you want to just position our webinar today within that pyramid.
Okay.
I'll let you take it over.
I thought that was still your part. Okay, no, I'll take it. So hi from my side. I'm Ingo, co-founder of Buynomics, and I'm leading through the main part of this webinar. And I think just to locate where we are. Today we're talking about pricing methods, but of course pricing is more than just the setting the right price. It also has to do with strategy, price implementation, infrastructure, software, data, and so on, teams that you need to make the rest work. We just concluded a webinar series where we went through all of these topics. And if you're interested, they are available on our website. I think they're also available on YouTube. So you can take a look at these. And if there are topics that you're interested in the future and you think we might have something to say on these, then we're very happy to consider these for our next webinar series. In this webinar series, so what we're planning to do is that we will talk today on pricing methods. We will then go into some industry-specific cases, pharmaceuticals. We'll do this one in German. We will talk about specific pricing challenges for telco companies. We will talk about specific pricing challenges for CPG companies in May, and we will also talk about pricing with a specific focus on the needs for private equity companies. And we will then also in April have a webinar on behavioral pricing. I think this is something very interesting for many people in the community, and I think we have something to add, and we will come to that later as we're able with the solution that we're building to also model behavioral pricing effects, and you can essentially turn these on and off and actually see how behavioral factors really affect and separate the buying behavior of customers from purely rational customers. So here are some of the topics that we want to cover in the coming month. If you have something else, as I said, we're very happy to add further webinars. If it's something where we feel that we have something to add, we're more than happy to do so, and we want to keep the discussion alive here. So what are we talking about? What's pricing about? So essentially, very simply, pricing is about setting the right price, but there's typically not the price. Of course, there's the end customer price, there are list prices, there are discounts, there are various number of net prices, net 1 to 3, and all of these things need to be optimized in some sense, and there are different levers in the tool set of the pricing managers. But I think the core, and this is also what we'll focus on today, is the end customer price that's actually been paid by a customer. And we are talking about how to optimize these and what are the typical methods in the field available for that. And we will at the end also have a quick outlook on how we are treating these methods and how to price essentially with the solution that we're building, and which also in some sense allows you to integrate different methods. So this is what we want to do today. We have about half an hour, and so we won't be able to cover everything, but if you have specific questions, we have some time in the end to answer these, and we're looking forward to your feedback then. So in essence, I think at a starting point, pricing is very simple. And the simplest way, and we all have seen this, I think, many times, is a demand function. But what is a demand function really? It maps different prices. So if you have a high price, few people will buy your product. If you have a low price, many people will typically buy your product. And with everything in between, you have this demand function. And for every one of these price points in the middle, you can essentially say you have a number of customers here, and they are willing to pay less than the price, so they will not buy your product at this price. And here are the people who are willing to pay more than your price, and they are the ones who will buy your product. So you add these up, and if you go down with the price, some of them here will change their opinion. They will become a buyer. If you increase the price here, then some of these will jump off and you will lose customers. And then the question for pricing is, how does this price point and the decisions of these people down here affect things like profitability, revenue, sales, and so on? And I think one of the most established tools to talk about that, and one that in the work that we're doing we see is we come to increasingly dislike, is the price elasticity, and I will come to that in a minute why we do that. But very simply, this is a very useful tool for understanding how customers react to price changes. So simply put, the price elasticity compares how a price change, so you increase the price here by 1%, how that affects the volume change. So a 1% price increase in this case leads to a 2% price decrease, and that means your elasticity is -2 in this case. But there are many challenges, and we will see that when we look in the solution, are that price elasticity depends on a lot of things. It depends on competitor prices. It depends on your price level. So typically price elasticity, and for example, in this case with the linear demand function, price elasticity is not constant. So here it's -2, here it's something very different, here it's something very different. So it's not a property of a product. So saying something like the price elasticity of this product is -2 doesn't really make sense, because the price elasticity of a product depends on what other products cost, and also depends on the price of this particular product. So it's a very challenging topic, challenging concept, but it's conceptually it's something that's very useful for understanding pricing. And I think what makes it most useful is this property here. So if, as in this example, you're in a case where you have this demand function, you know the price elasticity of your product. For example, here, you know at a price of you have a cost of 100, a price elasticity of -2, then you know because of this formula, because you know in the optimum, elasticity times margin is -1. So you know that the profit optimal price in this case is 200. So you typically know your cost. If you then know your price elasticity, you know your optimal price, your profit optimal price. In this case, you're 200. And this is a very, I think, useful rule, but it's only true in a one product case. So if you're only selling apples, as in this example, this is fine. And if you can measure price elasticity, you know exactly what your profit optimal price will be. However, if you add further products, so for example, if you decide to also sell peaches, then you cannot apply this formula because you have trade-offs between apples and peaches. If you increase the price of the apple, more people will buy peaches. And the same if a competitor comes into the market who also sells apples or peaches, we will see this example later in more detail, then the optimal price is also not 200 as in this case, because you cannot use this formula anymore. So this is a challenge, but it's nevertheless in the simplest case, elasticity times margin -1 you have in the optimum. This I think is a very useful relationship, something very useful to know. When you do pricing, you can always apply this formula and you get an idea if you're roughly in the right ballpark in terms of your pricing. But if there are more than one product, if there's more than one product involved, you need to have additional rules. And this is, I think, where also concepts like value pricing come into place. So the idea is that you want to differentiate prices between your products, considering the preferences of customers. So in this example, we're looking at ski jackets, and they have two key features that make a difference from a customer's point of view. You have the filling, synthetic filling, and down filling. Down filling is valued more by the customer. And then you have the water column, so how water resistant the jacket is. And if it's more water resistant, it also has a higher value to the customers. So in both cases, the markup would be 50 in this case. And using this logic, I think it's very straightforward to define the price structure of this portfolio of 4 jackets. And of course, it's easy to see this is a very simple example, but if you have a much larger portfolio with many more value drivers and attributes, you can simply apply this logic and get a price structure that looks to yourself internally, but also to the customer, very structured and clear where the prices are coming from. A challenge with that is, and we will see that in an example, is that this does not optimize your profits, and also customers behaviorally, they don't want like clean prices. They are looking for opportunities. So customers are much more interested in finding cases where you see, okay, I'm getting a bargain. So a price difference here is not 50, but it's maybe 10 or 20, and they feel that they're getting a bargain by getting something cheaper than they're supposed to. So this is something that we see in pricing very commonly, that people or companies build these price structures. In consumer goods, it's pack price architectures. I would say it's always a very similar logic that's being applied. And this is really behind it. You try to understand what's the value to the customer. And we also did a webinar on that, how to measure that. It can be taken from actual sales data. It can be measured via some survey data, expert judgment. All kinds of sources can be used to come up with these numbers. But it's important to know that they do not guarantee a profit optimum or revenue optimum, whatever you're aiming for in the end. So there are, when we summarize, and because of timing, we won't go into each one in detail. Typically, or in generally, I would say there are 3 key methods in pricing that are very common. The simplest one, cost plus, which relates very directly to the elasticity example that we showed in the beginning. If you know that your price elasticity is always -2, then you can always go with a margin of 50%, and you're in the profit optimum if there are no interactions between your products. But the challenges are, of course, twofold. One is if you have a more complex portfolio, there are interactions between your products. That's one. And the second one, it's often it's not easy to determine this price elasticity. And as we already said, price elasticity is usually not constant, but changes with price changes. So it's difficult to get the right margin for your products. One example that we just highlighted with the jacket example, value pricing, is something that is very, I would say, broadly used with companies in our experience. I think because it has some appeal, but because the core idea is that you say, okay, we price what the product is valued to worth to the customer, but there are of course some changes, some difficulties with this concept. One is it's not so easy to measure how much a product or a feature is worth to a customer, because it's difficult to say who the customer is. Typically, you don't have the customer, but you have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of customers, and they all put a different value to the product. And it's important to understand how this is distributed to get the pricing right. And also, value pricing typically ignores things like behavioral pricing, where you can also assess if you have 3 products that people tend to buy the middle option, and how to optimize this. So this is something that's difficult to integrate into a standard value pricing approach. And the third one is competitive pricing. And the idea here is similar to value pricing, I would say, in that you look how your competitors are pricing a product and you position yourself relative to a competitor. But here again, the challenge is to identify the proper price difference versus your competitor. Should you be 5% above, 5% below, 10 above, or 10 below, and how that affects your profitability, and also how that affects your competitor if they have a different opinion of how prices should be differentiated between the two of you. So these are, I would say, the most frequently used concepts that I've seen. And on top of the challenges that we just outlined, I think it's also very difficult to bring these into one concept. So if you, for example, if you have set up your prices as in a value pricing, you build a price structure, but your competitor has a very different price structure, what should you aim for? Should you be aligned within your own products, or should you be aligned relative to the key competitor products? And I think one of the most frequently things that I've seen is something like this, where prices are built up essentially in a waterfall, going from cost. You define something like a base margin or a base price in the beginning, then off that base price, as we did in the jacket example, you have your value drivers, differentiate the prices of your portfolio. Then you check whether or not your pricing is aligned with your competition. You get something like a competitor price, and then you do essentially some final checks. If your value pricing, competitor pricing brought you below some margin threshold, for example, and you add some price cosmetics, so that in the end you don't end up with a price of, I don't know, 287, but you go to 289. You look for price thresholds or some other aspects of pricing. So I would say that that's something that we see very frequently. And what it does is it ensures that you have these concepts aligned to some extent. It ensures that you have a consistent price structure of your products in the end. But what it doesn't ensure is profitability. So this method does not help you optimize your profits. And when we come back to the jacket example, so we did that not with ski jackets, but with a different product, but with similar numbers. What we saw there is that we compared these value prices and the sales volumes that relate to that. Of course, then you can compute how much profit you make with this value-based optimization. And we found that there's a different price setting that essentially has a bit lower price here for the top product, a bit higher price at the bottom product, and that led to a 8% more profitable portfolio in this case. So this is something that these concepts are lacking, so they don't guarantee optimization. And this is something, and I think this is I would say, an outlook of where pricing is going from our point of view, that you, with the proper modeling underneath, you have the opportunity to better assess the profitability effects of price changes. And we want to show that first in a simple example, and then go into a bit more complex example to highlight what we mean and how that can be used to improve pricing. And for that, I will go to the browser if I can. So I hope you can now see my browser. Paul, is
yes,
it?
We can see it.
Hey, perfect. That's the most most difficult part here. So let's have a simple example, like the Apple example that we just had. And the idea is that we're selling at first only apples. Ignore the peers here. And the idea is we have costs of 50 cents for our apple, and we have a current list price of 130. And when we simulate essentially this apple market here in the background, what we see is essentially, or what's going on here, is that we are simulating. So we have what we call virtual customers, and we have, I think, 1,000 of these in the machine, and each one of them makes an individual purchasing decision. So they all have their willingness to pay, their preferences, and so on, and they decide at 130 how many apples they would who would buy apples, and how many. And in this case, so if we go down, for example, with the price, we see that more people are buying here the apple, and based on this demand function here, we can also look at revenue, profit, price elasticity, and so on. And here's, when we look at the price elasticity, we already see what I mentioned before, that it's not constant. So price elasticity essentially always changes with price level. So it doesn't make sense to say the price elasticity of this product is -2 or 2.5, because it always depends on where you are priced at the moment. So it's more like a broken watch, right? It's somewhere it's correct, but most of the time, if you just say price elasticity is -2, it's not true. So, and you can use this, for example, if you're aiming for a profit optimization, you can see where the profit optimum is, and in this case here, it's at 130. €1.30, and you see at 130 the price elasticity is -1.67. The cost is 50, so you have a margin of 80 cents, and the percentage margin is somewhere around 60%. So our equation margin times elasticity is -1 holds true in this example. So this is a very simple example. We're just looking at one product, at the apple here, and I think we can make it more realistic and more interesting by adding a competitor product. And now we have a competitor, so we're still selling apples. Our cost is 50 cents. Our competitor is selling pears, so he's competitor here, also 50 cents. And the willingness to pay for each product, for each fruit, is about the same in this example. And we can look at what that looks like in the market if we offer apples and our competitor offers pears, and we are selling at the current price 130, competitor say also sells at 130, then we see that we are here below our profit optimum, and we can improve our profit when we go to the optimum. But and we know this from like wargaming, for example, then the competitor would also go to a different price, and then sort of then we are again not in the optimum anymore. We would have to change our price, and this converges at some point, and we see that in the optimum our price would be 95 cents. I think for the competitor also, yeah, €1. So it's about in the same range. So it shows you that it's easy to model these competitive interactions, and you see that also that the price elasticity in this case -2 is different in the optimum from the price elasticity that we had in the previous example. And you can use this essentially depending on where the competitor is priced. And you see that when the competitor changes price, our elasticity changes. You can use it given the competitor price to optimize your own pricing and see what to do best. And just looking at the time, I want to wrap this up. We can look at different cases. So we had the first example where only we were selling apples. We saw that in the optimum we were selling at 130, sold 353 units. In the case with the competitor, we were selling at 95 cents. And in the third example, it's easy to see that you can think of, let's say we bought the competitor and we're now selling apples and pears, and of course then we can optimize both prices, or we can likewise optimize the portfolio if we're looking at our whole portfolio, where we are optimizing the total price of these two products, and then we would be selling both at 135, and we see that what the profit effects are. So with two products, we're a bit more profitable than with one. And here we see how sort of annoying it is to have a competitor who forces us, who takes away part of the market and also forces us to a lower price level. This was just a small toy example, but of course, and then I'll hand over to Paul again, the same thing can be done with realistic examples. So here's we have a product, we're selling peanut butter in different sizes. We have different competitors with different products. So we have a market with 7 products. So something like a consumer goods scenario. And essentially, very much like in the toy example with the apple and pear, we have the same opportunity. You can also look where the profit optimum is. We have elasticities for all of these products. And you see here that because of the intense interactions with lots of different products, how elasticities change. If, for example, if you change a price here, you see that the curve for other product changes massively, but this here allows you to have a full view on how the market reacts to price or product changes. So this was just a quick outlook on what's possible, and I hope that we gave a good overview of the standard methods and also what their limitations are, and what we think the future is, and what we just showed is just one way of the future, and it's the one we're building. But there are of course other tools that might be able to do something similar.
Awesome. Thanks, Ingo. We got a lot of questions, so I'll try to go through them one by one. And if you have a hard cut at 3:30, I totally understand that a lot of you are putting this into their busy schedule. So I just want to say up front, if you like this webinar, we have an upcoming one. I posted it in the chat, so register if you are interested in behavioral pricing. And if you want to stick around, I think Ingo and we have some more time. We'll answer all these questions live as well. Yeah, if you have additional questions, happy to do that by email as well. So we have a bunch of questions here. For example, Steve is asking regarding the willingness to pay, how and where do you gather that from, gather those willingness to pay?
Yeah.
So I think that's quite interesting because it speaks to how the method works.
Yeah, very good question. We have a webinar on this topic, and we're getting it from the similar sources that are typically used in pricing. So we can read it out, for example, from sales data, studies, conjoint, for example, or you can also estimate willingness to pay with expert judgment and so on. So essentially the same data sources that are used also in that are frequently used in pricing. We have a webinar on that, but we're happy to do another one to go here in more detail.
Sounds good. And then Monica is asking if you can run an example with 4 to 5 customers. I think this is speaking to our capability to do B2B scenarios. I think in this webinar, we won't go over that. If you want, we can always schedule a demo. You can find the link on our website, and we can show you how we're working with B2B customers. But I think for the sake of time, I'll jump to some other ones that we have here. For instance, let me see, someone is asking, what's the value of price elasticity today if the elasticity is based on historical prices and we are in an unpredictable world? Are there methods to still use this metric reliably?
Yeah. I would think so. There are different things that go into a price elasticity. One is essentially the inherent preferences of people. So how much are people willing to pay for an apple as in this example? And from our experience, that doesn't change too much in many cases. So what an apple is worth to a person is fairly stable. What changes is the environment. So there might be more alternatives. Competitors might enter the market with cheaper apples. You have pears and other fruit, and they draw away some demand from the apple. And this can be modeled if you know the alternatives and the inherent the preference for a product that's in many cases very stable. There are exceptions, so you have things like technical inflation, so the willingness of to pay for a gigabyte of data in a mobile contract, for example, that decreases from year to year. So you have to understand, so we have to understand where the dynamics come from and separate those things that are more stable from the ones that are changing quickly and can be modeled, for example, competition in a tool like this one.
Yeah, and then someone's asking again, how are you managing extraordinary issues such as the loading of product during a pandemic and not allowing them to give you a false elasticity measure? So I'm guessing this is about demand surges and perhaps like pent up demand, and then also pent up inventory, so maybe less future demand.
Yeah.
How do you work with that?
I would say two things on that. One is what we often see is that if you have demand increases, for example, if you have seasonal products, ice cream, that relative market shares do not change so much. And so the market size increases or decreases based on external factors, but what happens to market shares within a market is determined by the price differences or the products that are offered, and these things can be separated from each other. So you have for example, a model that determines the market size in a certain week or month, and you have a different model that determines market shares based on pricing and so on. And these things can be separated. So in general, you can work with these two things in separate and put them together and have a reliable model. Having said that, I think particularly last year with the Corona case, there are some situations that are not predictable, but these are rare exceptions where you have 1 or 2 weeks when you go to the store and everything is sold out, then and you have like capacity constraints and so on, that has a major impact on sales volumes. So there are some cases that maybe cannot be predicted at all or difficult to assess, but these are rare or have been rare in the past. And everything else that's more seasonal, where markets increase, decrease in size, they can be separated between the effects that affect the whole market and the ones that affect the market via the interplay of prices and competitor products.
Yeah, I think a recurring question I think we get from people in the consumer goods space, so quite good that we raised this question here. Another viewer is asking, with regards to revenue and profit, how much importance would you put on costs if your revenue increases, e.g. price decrease with a negative elasticity, but profit decreases, e.g. constant prices? So I'm assuming this is basically asking, can you optimize your profits if you feel like you have very little leeway in adjusting pricing? And I think our portfolio view in the solution can solve that, because we look at overarching profitability, right?
Yeah, I think from an analytics point of view, what you can provide is transparency on how profit, revenue, and so on are affected by price changes, for example, or product changes. Whether you're aiming for profit or revenue, that's a strategic question that you need to answer essentially outside of a solution. The solution tells you, okay, this you can have this much profit, you can have this much revenue. How you decide between the two, that's your strategic decision, and it depends on the overall objectives in the organization, and they of course should be aligned.
Yeah, makes sense. So someone is also asking about competitive pricing, which we touched upon here, and asks what should be included in the analysis. So can you shed some light on how we include competition in pricing?
Yeah, so essentially what matters in terms of product differences, so does your how does your competitor products relate to your product? So do they have stronger or weaker brand? Do they have better features in their products, more horsepower, or more of something else? So how do the products relate to each other? How are these things valued by customers? You can get this, for example, via conjoint studies or from sales data. We can read this out based on the decisions customers took in the past between these different products. And of course, the pricing plays a role. And also something where you say, okay, we know how certain competitors react. So if we know, I don't know, you have two competitors, A and B, and you know competitor A always follows your price move, and B maybe doesn't, or maybe B wants to be the cheapest in the market. So essentially you need to understand how differences in product and are valued by customers, how customers choose between your and your competitor products at different prices, and also what's helpful if you do some, for example, a wargaming, an understanding of how your competitor reacts to price changes and what their objectives are. Do they follow, or do they always want to be the cheapest or most expensive? And with this, you can typically model competitor behavior.
Cool. And someone is asking specifically about the solution. Is it possible to load the tool in an optimized way in order to deal with several hundreds of references? I'm assuming references means price points or products. So can you speak to the use cases as well?
Yeah. So the question is how many are relevant from a customer point of view, and in our experience, customers decide between, I would say, a few dozen alternative in the maximum, and this is also what we found to be the maximum useful size for a simulation. So we wouldn't put in hundreds of products, because then you have a long tail where products are not being sold at all, or are below 1%. So we see that we get the best results when like all products that we're looking at have a decent market share.
All right. So I think we are almost through all the questions. Someone's also asking, when we are playing in the share economy like Airbnb, could you run an example? So I'm assuming this is more about some place where the price is very individual to the product. So like basically every product has a different price. Maybe I'm misphrasing that, but that's my interpretation of that. I'm
not sure if I understand this. Can you read it again?
So if we are in the sharing economy,
yeah.
How would the model work there? So can you run an example there?
Yeah, so I think the relevant situation is that an end customer looks at different alternatives. I think that's one use case. and that customer sees, I don't know, like on Airbnb, 10 or so different apartments, and chooses between these. And then you can run a model like this to optimize, maybe from a renter point of view, what price to set. That could be one use case. Another use case could be from Airbnb. So they could, for example, optimize the pricing from their point of view, which might be a bit different from then the perspective of an individual vendor. Or you can also optimize it from an Airbnb point of view, the markup or the margin that or the fee that they're collecting from the transaction. So there are different ways of looking at that challenge, and I think it makes sense to get a good understanding of what the relevant one is. But in essence, I think the key unit of analysis would be to look at what an end customer sees, maybe 10 or 20 different apartments, and how to optimize these relative to each other based on the preferences of that customer.
All right. Cool. Then we're pretty close to the end. Someone's also asking on costs. Let me pull up the question. How much emphasis would you put into diseconomies of scale if a product you're selling is produced internally versus a product that is purchased from a third party, and cost per product is a given? So I'm assuming this is more asking around the profitability. And can you relate that to pricing? I think that's not a primary concern for pricing.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on, or we're not experts on cost, but the way to consider cost here is, for example, if you have economies of scale and your costs decrease with the number of products you sell, then you can put that in as an equation where you say, okay, my initial cost, I don't know, it's 100, and then it decreases by 1% for every 10 units or so I sell. And then you can put in that formula and use that formula to optimize the profit in the end. That would be how to look at it from a pricing point of view. How to actually decrease prices, make or buy, I don't know.
Okay, that's for another software to solve. So thanks everyone for your questions. If you like this webinar, give us a like on Facebook, follow us for more there. And you'll also receive an invitation, and I put a link in the chat for the upcoming webinar on behavioral pricing. If you have any suggestions on what topics you would like us to cover, you can send us an email or just write us in the chat, and we will definitely put those points on the agenda. Yeah, hope you liked it, and hope to see you next time for more interesting discussions on behavioral pricing. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.